Good afternoon, and welcome to TradeStation's online seminar series. My name is Michael Burke, and today I'll be your host as we present some programming techniques utilizing loops and arrays in EasyLanguage. Please keep in mind that all examples, symbols, and ideas discussed are for demonstration purposes only and are not recommendations or endorsements of these examples. And any past historical performance that we talk about does not guarantee future results. If you have trouble viewing this presentation, please go back to the logon page for troubleshooting help. You can also refresh the presentation anytime by pressing the F5 function key. You'll notice at the lower portion of your view window there is a place where you may submit questions live during the seminar. During the presentation I'll try to answer as many of those questions as I can, but all questions submitted will be answered by email at the end of this presentation. At the heart of what we do at TradeStation is an underlying technology called EasyLanguage. EasyLanguage is a trader's programming language, and all of the indicators and strategies that are built into TradeStation are written in EasyLanguage. This seminar is going to talk about ways of utilizing some of the more powerful features of EasyLanguage, which are loops and arrays, for being able to accomplish certain types of technical problems that you need to, technical indicator problems that you need to solve within your programming code, and some powerful tools that you can, these are powerful tools that you can use to create more powerful indicators and strategies. Now, from a programmer's point of view, loops and arrays are typically used to manage data within a program. And with TradeStation, most of the data management is already handled for you. All of the data that's in the chart, all of the different variables that you create within your indicators and strategies, all of those are managed automatically for you, and we have a very very powerful way of accessing all of those data tools within EasyLanguage. So for the most part, loops and arrays are used only when the data management aspect of your indicator strategy is not already being done by TradeStation. This is done when you're looking at nonlinear data streams. Maybe you're looking at certain events that happen during the chart, or you're not really sure what you're looking for and you're cycling back historically until you find something. So loops and arrays are very unique tools that allow us to accomplish those things that aren't accomplished automatically for us. So in this seminar we're going to look at the most common type of loop in a programming language, which is a for loop. We'll also talk about while loops, which are part of just another aspect of loops. And we're going to talk about arrays. Now, an array is simply a variable that holds more than one value. And I'll give you an example of where an array might be useful within a more powerful indicator or strategy. But let me just remind you, as I was preparing this seminar, it was very difficult for me to find those kinds of examples that I thought would be representative of what most people would be using loops and arrays for, because honestly, in all of my years of programming in EasyLanguage, I've used loops and arrays very sparingly, and again, that's because EasyLanguage handles all of those functions for us automatically most of the time. So I will show you some examples, and people ask me, well, when will I need a loop and an array? And the best answer to that is you'll know it when you need it. And so hopefully this seminar will give you some background and will give you some insights to those kinds of solutions and problems that you can solve with loops and arrays. So let's start off with loops, and the most common type of loop in any programming language is what's called a for loop. A for loop is a loop that iterates some number of times. And think about the way that TradeStation calculates. When you insert an indicator or strategy into a chart, the indicator or strategy calculates once per each bar. So a loop would allow me to run multiple statements over and over again each time there was a calculation event within the chart. So once each bar, or if we're trading real time, every time there's a tick event, when the market is trading real time, I have an opportunity to run my loop and to do whatever work that loop needs to do. Now typically in EasyLanguage, since all of the data management is done for us, the three main ways that I use loops in my programming is with historical reference, where I want to look back some number of bars and calculate or grab values from each of those historical bars. I will use loops in multi-data analysis. Whenever I have more than one symbol in the chart, if I want to create an indicator that references all of those different multi-data elements within a chart, I can use a loop to quickly navigate all of the data elements within a chart. And of course, the most common use for a loop in any programming language is to navigate arrays. Now, if you think of an array as a variable that holds multiple values, well, how am I going to get through all of those multiple values very quickly? And that's where a for loop would come in. I typically know how big the array is, so I can set up an array to go from one value to another value and quickly navigate all the elements within an array. If you look at my example here in the slide, this is a good example of a very basic for loop. I create an input that is going to be the number of iterations that the loop will go through, and I create a variable that's going to hold the value that the loop is going to calculate. So here in my code, the for loop starts the statement, and value 1 becomes my loop counter. In most for loops, in fact in every for loop, there is always a loop counter. This keeps track of what iteration the loop is on. And so in a loop that is going to iterate 5 times, value 1 is going to equal 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. In this case, I want the loop to iterate from starting at 0, and I want to iterate 5 times, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That would be my 5 iterations. So here you can see that I subtracted 1 from my length, which is 5, so that I actually am iterating 5 times. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which gives me my 5 iterations. The first time through the loop, it's going to calculate some highs by looking at some highs, which starts out at 0, and then adding the high of 1 bar ago, or in this case, since it starts out at 0, 0 bars ago, which is the current bar. So that's the first time through the iteration. The second time through the iteration, the loop counter is incremented to 1. So now some highs equals some highs plus the high of 1 bar ago, and then 2 bars ago, and then 3 bars ago, and then 4 bars ago. Once the loop counter gets to the maximum number of iterations, it breaks out of the loop and continues on with the rest of the code. So that is a very typical example of programming code for a loop. Let's look at a more practical example in EasyLanguage. I'm going to go to TradeStation, and I'm going to show you a chart, and this is the problem that I wanted to solve, and then I'll show you the code on how we solved it with using a loop. In the bottom of the chart, I've created an indicator which I call bull count, and really it is just looking for whether the bar is higher than the previous bar. And the way that I determine that is that the high of this bar is higher than the previous bar, and the low of this bar is also higher than the low of the previous bar. So a higher high and a higher low. And what my bull count indicator does is it looks back 5 bars, and it tells me in the last 5 bars how many bars had a higher high and a higher low. And so throughout the chart, I can see on every bar what that sequence was. And when I get above my alert level of 3.5, which means the count is 4 or 5, then I can trigger an alert. So the idea is to look back over the past 5 bars and see how many times in the last 5 bars I had a higher high and a higher low. And that's my bull signal. I'm going to right click on the indicator, and I'm going to open up the code for that. And again, this code looks very similar to the one we just saw in the slides, but let's just walk through it. Here I have an input which is my look back length. So if I want to change this to look back 10 bars, or I want to change it to look back only 3 bars, I have the ability to change that that look back here as an input. I create an input which I call x, which is my loop counter. This is something that I've done my whole life. Whenever I'm using loops, I typically will create a loop counter called x. If I have 2 loops that are nested, I'll make it x and y. If I have 3 loops that are nested, I'll make them x, y, and z. So this is a very typical type programming convention, and you can use any variable as your loop counter. Some people use value 1, value 2, the built-in using the built-in variables, numeric variables. You can use whatever you'd like. And of course I have my bull count, which is how many bars were up in a row over the last 5. Now since I'm going to be making that count on every single bar, I need to make sure that on every single bar bull count starts out at 0. So whenever you're doing anything that increments or anything that's a counter, especially if that counter is happening on every bar, make sure that at the beginning of your actual code that you reset those variables to 0 on each bar, so you don't end up with an accumulation calculation that doesn't mean anything. And of course if that happens, you're going to see it really quickly in your indicator, and you're going to remember, oh yes, I have to reset that back to 0. So here's the actual work of this indicator. We're going to use a for loop, and here my loop counter is x, and I'm going to start it off at 0. 0 being the current bar, to my score lookback minus 1. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That gives me a 5-bar lookback. And here's the actual logic. If the high of x is greater than the high of x plus 1, so think about x starting out at 0, that's the high of the current bar, 0, greater than the high of 1 bar ago. And the low of the current bar has to be greater than the low of 1 bar ago. If that's true, on the first time through the iteration, bull count equals bull count, starting off at 0 plus 1, so now bull count equals 1. And it goes to the next iteration within my loop. Now x equals 1. It's the high of 1 bar ago, greater than the high of now 2 bars ago, and so on and so forth. If that condition is true, bull count will increment. If it's not, it won't. At the end of that loop cycle, I'm going to have my count for this bar. How many bars, including the current bar and the previous 4, have higher highs and lower highs. I'm sorry, higher highs and higher lows. And that gives me my bull count. So here I plot that, and then I plot my reference line, which is my alert level, at 3.5. Now what's great about this is it has a lot of flexibility. I can change my score loopback. If I need to, I can change my reference value based on that. So a lot of flexibility here, and of course this is a great demonstration of how I am going to go back historically using a loop counter. So on each bar, as each bar becomes a calculation point, I am able to reference historically from that point back bar by bar, one by one, using a loop. Now I could do this exact same thing empirically, right? I could actually say the high of 1 bar ago is greater than the high of 2 bars ago, and go to the next one, and I could actually just spell out all 5 lines of code. But that wouldn't give me the flexibility of then having an input, which allows me to change how many times I look back just by changing that input. So it builds in quite a bit of flexibility. So if we look at that, what's actually happening here, again, here in this area, for example, is a good example of where we maxed out at 5, and on this bar, actually on these 2 bars, it was 5 for 2 bars in a row. But if you look back, you can see that that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so it was able to count all of those, and that's how we got to 5. All right. Another good example of using a for loop is for multi-data reference. Here I'm going to show you a very typical way that I use for loops, and that is by creating my own composite index. Within TradeStation, I am able to insert up to 50 different symbols within one chart. And if I wanted to create my own, Dow Industrial 30 index, but with my own 30 stocks, or maybe I'm creating a collection of futures to give me a kind of my own commodity index to see what overall commodities are. I'm using a number of international ETF sector symbols to figure out, is the overall international sector up or down. I'm able to insert those symbols into the chart and then create an indicator that references each of those. I can weight them, or I can make it just an even weighting. I can make a calculation and then end up having a composite indicator that I can follow as a bullish or bearish indicator. To insert a symbol into the chart, you simply start off with whatever your core symbol is. In this case, the symbol that I create the chart with is usually the symbol that I'll be trading, and then each of the multi-data elements that I put in after that are my composite. And so I'll always probably keep that first symbol on the chart and then my composite as an indicator to give me my composite score, my composite indication. So here, if I go to Insert Symbol, I'm able to create an additional symbol within the chart. In this case, I'm going to just make it GE. I'm going to type in GE as the new symbol and click Plot. And here you can see GE plots as an additional data stream within the chart. And a lot of times when you do that, you don't want to see the composite index symbols. You just want to see your main symbol and your indicator. So we give you the ability in TradeStation, if you double click on that second data stream, actually I can't double click because of our actual production technology here. It doesn't let me double click. But I'm going to go to do the same thing by going to Format Symbol. And here for GE, I'm going to click on Format. And on the Scaling tab for GE, I can say Hidden. And that can hide that symbol. So it's still in the chart, but it's no longer displayed. And so there it goes away. So let me show you all the symbols that I have in this chart. I'm going to go to Format Symbol. And I've actually preloaded this chart with 18 symbols. We just added one. I just added GE, which actually I already have in there, so I'm going to remove GE here. But I have 17 symbols in the chart, and the symbol that created the chart is at the top, which is the spiders. And then I've inserted all of those other symbols, and I've hidden them. So now we're going to use a for loop to navigate all of those data streams and calculate our composite index, which is being displayed here in the bottom of the chart. So I'm going to right click on our composite indicator, and I'm going to say Edit EasyLanguage, and we're going to take a look at that. So here, one of the things that I can't do in EasyLanguage, which I wish I could do, is I can't identify how many symbols are in the chart programmatically. So that's something that is a limitation that we can work around by simply making the number of symbols that I've put into the chart as an input. Now, if you don't put in the right number of symbols, what can happen is that you may try to reference a data stream that doesn't exist, and that would throw out an error. So we're always looking to try to avoid those kinds of things. So the best way, the cleanest way, when referencing or creating a composite like this, is to simply create an input, which is the number of symbols that you're going to put in the chart. And right now the default is 10. Obviously I have 17 in there, so in the chart I would change that to 17. Here I'm creating my variables, my loop counter again, what my composite score or my index will finally end up being at the end, and the calculation that I need to make on each symbol. And that variable is called %change. So again, remember that we need to reset our overall index variable to 0 for each calculation time. Each time it calculates on each bar, I need to reset that to 0. And notice that I'm starting my loop counter here at 2. And the reason I'm doing that is, remember that the symbol that I created the chart is actually my trading symbol, but it's not part of my composite. And so data 1 is the symbol that created the chart, and I want to skip that. I only want to look at data 2, data 3, up to however many symbols that I have in that particular window. So here I'm saying from X to 2 to number of symbols, and that can be up to 50. Then I calculate the %change. This is my way of calculating my composite indicator. I calculate the %change over the last 5 bars, and this is how we reference each of those data streams. Notice here we use the word data And then in parentheses, there's our loop counter, data x, where x is data 2, data 3, data 4, data 5, up to data 50. And so this modifier right here tells this function to calculate on data 2, then data 3, then data 4, then data 5, then data 6, and so on and so forth. Once I have the performance of each symbol, I actually accumulate that in my composite variable. Composite equals composite plus that performance of that symbol over the last 5 bars. I accumulate those values. Once I've run through all of the symbols, I give it a small 3-bar smoothing average, and then I plot it. I multiply it by 100, so it's a number that's a little easier to relate to than a small decimal number. And then I plot 0 as a reference line, because obviously this is going to be bullish or bearish depending on the performance of those, in this case, 17 symbols. So here, let's look at that chart again. And here you can see, as it goes through, this is a 15-minute chart, and so on every bar it's calculating that percent change over the last 5 bars. And as the accumulation of that performance over those 17 symbols change, we plot that cumulative composite index as a histogram. And so I can see when those 17 symbols turn bullish, I can see it crossing over 0 here, and when they turn bearish, I can see it crossing below 0. Using that little 3-bar smoothing kind of takes out some of the noise. And so it allows me to look and trade one symbol, but my signal for that one symbol is the performance, in this case, of 17 other symbols. 17 other symbols that I think, or you think, drive the market, or drive the symbol that you're trading. So it can be anything. It can be you might be trading a sector. You might be trading the automotive sector, and you have 10 automotive stocks in there. You might be trading the mining ETF, and you have 10 mining stocks. You look at the short-term performance of 10 mining stocks, and that determines what your outlook or what your trade is for the underlying symbol. So again, just an example of how I use a for loop, and that's another good example, just navigating those elements within in a multi-data chart. Now, I've already gotten a couple questions on, is it going to be possible to review this seminar? And of course, all seminars that we do, all these online seminars, are archived within a couple of weeks after the airing of the seminar. In addition, the workspace that you see here, along with the 3 charts and the indicators that I'm demonstrating, those will also be posted with the archives. It'll be a zip file. So you'll be able to take this code and use it as a reference for whenever you're building in these kinds of ideas into your indicators and strategies. You'll have some sample code that you can look at and use that as a guideline for your code. Another good question is, can I make the 0 line green, or can I make the index green when it's above 0 and red when it's below 0? Absolutely. One of the great things about EasyLanguage is that there is a set of functions which we call smart styling functions that allow you to change the color or thickness of an indicator based on a rule. So in your example, which is a good example, if the indicator goes above 0, I would paint the histogram green. If it's below 0, I could paint the histogram red. Since this is an EasyLanguage programming online seminar, it would be very easy to do that by simply saying, if composite is greater than 0, then set plot color for plot 1, which is the composite. I can set that to green, which is your example. Now when I verify this, it automatically recalculates the indicator wherever it is. And so now we have our indicator with your idea. When it's above 0, it's green, and when it's below 0, it's red. And I agree, that makes it look a little better. All right. let's talk about arrays. I'm going to jump back to PowerPoint here for just a second. Well, before we talk about arrays, let's talk about the other type of loop construct, which is a while loop. While loops are used much more infrequently than for loops, and in fact, I have read programming books in Visual Basic and C++, which actually say in the book that while loops are no longer used, and in fact it is a dead concept in programming. However, I don't totally believe that, because there have been times within EasyLanguage where a while loop has been very, very useful for me. For example, if I have a lot of trend lines on the chart and I wanted to be able to identify, say, a trend line by color, I can use a while loop to navigate all the trend lines in the chart until I come across the color that I'm looking for, and then it breaks out of the loop. So this is the construct for a while loop. While loops are used when you don't know how many iterations it's going to take. And in technical analysis, you might be looking back, bar by bar for a particular condition that occurred, and you want to know how many bars it occurred, but you don't know how far to look back. Well, a while loop can back up one bar at a time until it finds that condition. As soon as it finds it, it can break out of that while loop. So I still think that while loops have a use in programming. As I said, I've only used them a couple of times, but you never know when you're going to need it. When you come across a problem that you need to solve, it's possible that a while loop could solve that problem. So if you look at the code example here in the slide, there is always a true-false condition that follows the while statement. While that condition is true, it is going to iterate through the statements within the while loop, and it's going to do it forever until that condition is no longer true. So in this case, I create a situation where it absolutely has to break out by saying value 2 equals value 2 plus 1. When value 2 gets to 10, which it will, then value 1 equals 0. And so this condition would no longer be true, and it would break out of the loop. So one of the things you need to be worried about if you're going to use while loops is the fact that you can program yourself into an infinite loop situation. And an infinite loop simply means that the loop will go forever. Now, TradeStation and most high-level programming languages now don't allow that to happen. After a certain amount of time or a certain amount of iterations, EasyLanguage will automatically break you out. In the old days, when I first started programming in BASIC, if I had created a loop that I coded poorly and it turned into an infinite loop, the only way to stop that loop would have been to turn off my computer and then reboot your computer. So fortunately, we're not at that level anymore. There is actually infinite loop detection built into EasyLanguage that will break you out of the loop. However, let me warn you that you can turn infinite loop detection off, which I have in the past, unfortunately. And again, poorly coding my while loop and turning off the infinite loop detection was a bad idea. And so I ended up having to completely shut down TradeStation in order to get my TradeStation to actually be responsive again. So be careful when working with while loops. But again, when will you need a while loop? As I said, I've only used them a couple of times, out of thousands of indicators and strategies. So it's you'll know it when you need it, and it's always whether or not you know the number of iterations. If you don't know the number of iterations, that's probably when you need a while loop. All right, let's move on to arrays. Now, arrays are, by definition, a database management tool. It is a variable that holds multiple values. And the reason you do that is you want to have some kind of, you want to treat those values within that array as one data stream or as one object. And you're going to operate on all of those elements within that. They relate to each other, and typically they are nonlinear. because if they were linear, then you wouldn't need an array. You could just reference them within the chart historically using the bracket notation for historical reference. So the only time we really need arrays is when we're storing something that is nonlinear within the chart. Maybe I'm looking for, key reversals within my chart, and every time there's a key reversal, I want to capture what the low of that key reversal is, so that I can figure out over the last 2 years, what were those real resistance points every time there was a low, and maybe I average them and come up with some kind of a support and resistance line that's kind of a macro support and resistance line for all the key reversal lows within the chart. So those are ways, some of the ways that we might use arrays, and I'll give you an example of coding an array here. Now, in EasyLanguage, we offer one-dimensional arrays, which you can see here in the slide really looks like a column of numbers in a spreadsheet. And if you think of it that way, it makes it easier to organize your thoughts and your data management within your indicator using arrays. So an array has a name just like a variable, but each of the elements within that array we're going to reference by its array element number. And an array can be as big as you need it to be. It can have 10 elements, it can have 1,000 elements, it can have 10,000 elements. Keep in mind that we store these arrays on every bar. So the bigger the array is, the bigger the memory overhead of that indicator is going to be in every chart that indicator appears in. So arrays are definitely memory intensive, so keep that in mind. We also offer a one-dimensional dynamic array. And these are probably the most useful arrays in EasyLanguage simply because a lot of times you don't know how big the array needs to be. So we give you the ability to grow the array or shrink the array dynamically on a bar-by-bar basis. We use a function within EasyLanguage called array set max index. That can be called on every bar, and I can adjust the size of my array on the fly, either multiple times on the bar or one time per bar. Whenever I need to, I can increase or decrease the size of that array. And most of the arrays that I use in EasyLanguage are in fact dynamic arrays, because you never know. Especially think about it, since these are nonlinear values that I'm capturing. A lot of times you don't know how many of those nonlinear values appear in a chart. So by using a dynamic array, we can be more memory efficient and only grow the array when we need that array to grow. We also offer two-dimensional arrays. A two-dimensional array is, now think about it as a spreadsheet. I have columns, and now instead of just rows, I have columns and rows. And so I'm able to reference a two-dimensional array using that same array element reference, and I'll show you that within the code here in a second so you can see what that looks like. And finally, there are three-dimensional arrays in EasyLanguage. I've only used a three-dimensional array once, and it was building some activity bar indicator several years ago, but that's the only time I've ever used a three-dimensional array, and so I don't think that's going to be something that most of you will be having to deal with, but one- and two-dimensional arrays are quite common. Now, since an array is a variable, the array can hold text values, true-false values, or more commonly, numeric values. Most of the variables that you work with in EasyLanguage are probably numeric variables, so an array of numeric values is simply an array of numeric numbers that you're calculating and storing. And of course, there is a new type of variable called an intra-bar persist variable, which allows variables to hold their values on a tick-by-tick basis. And arrays can also be intra-bar persist arrays. So you can also calculate and store and reference the elements within an array on a tick-by-tick intra-bar persist using that method. Once we have our values in our array, EasyLanguage has a family of functions that allow you to sort the array or average the array, look for the highest or lowest value within the array. When we get to my example here, we'll go out to the dictionary, and I'll show you how you can quickly find all of those functions that operate on arrays within EasyLanguage. But these are probably typically the most common functions that you'll be using within an array. All right, let's go back to TradeStation. And the last chart that I want to show you is my support and resistance levels. Remember that I mentioned that it might be interesting to calculate a support and resistance level based on key reversal lows. This is a very similar concept, except that it is looking for higher highs and lower lows, and I'll show you that calculation. And basically what it does here is it looks at the last 5 highest highs and the last 5 lowest lows, and it averages them and gives me my support and resistance levels. So it's not looking at all of them in the chart, it's just looking at the last 5. And so this is a good example of an array that will allow me to store these nonlinear events. Every time that there's a higher high or there's a lower low, it's going to capture that value and store it in my array, giving me the ability to average the last 5, which gives me my support and resistance level. So let's look at the code for this. I'm going to right click and open up this EasyLanguage code. So a couple of things we're going to do here. We're going to look at the array declaration. We're going to look at putting values into the array, taking values out of the array, manipulating that array, and then finally doing some calculations on the array. So here, my first input is my highest high and lowest low look back. So we're looking for the highest high or lowest low. That's the event that we're looking for. When that happens, we're going to capture that highest high, or we're going to capture that lowest low. Here, we want to see how many we want to look back for our average. Right now, I'm looking back 5. So I'm going to average the last 5 throughout the chart, the last 5 highest highs, the last 5 lowest lows. We create some variables to do our calculations. There's our loop counter, which is x, my average highest high, the highest high condition, which I'm looking for, the average of the lowest low, and my lowest low conditions. And then we're going to create 2 dynamic arrays to store those highs and highs when that event occurs. So here you can see the array declaration looks just like a variable declaration. I give it the name of my array, and since I'm declaring a dynamic array, I don't put anything in the square brackets. Now, if you're used to historical reference within EasyLanguage, we reference elements within an array using that same bracket notation. But when I don't put anything inside the brackets in the declaration of the array, that makes it a dynamic array. The null value in there is what makes that a dynamic array. If you know how many elements are going to be in the array, you can put in, and that becomes the highest element within that array. So that would be an array that would hold values of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And so there would actually be an 11 array. That would be an 11 element array. If it's a 2-dimensional array, I simply use a comma, and now this is going to be 10 rows and 5 columns wide. A 3-dimensional array would just be another comma. And so here I've declared a 3-dimensional array, which is 10 rows, 5 columns, and then 3 spreadsheets deep. Think of it as Excel when you're creating a 1, 2, or 3-dimensional array. In this case, we want it to be a dynamic array. So the way that we set the size of a dynamic array is with a function called arraySetMaxIndex. Here we specify the name of the array and how big we want that array to be. In this case, I'm simply making it the size of my input. So remember that we are capturing the last 5 highest highs and lowest lows within the chart so that we can calculate the average of those values as our support and resistance level. So I only need to store the last 5. And so I'm setting my array size for higher high and lower low to the 5 input that I've set there. And of course that builds in flexibility. If I want to average the last 3 or the last 8, all I have to do is change my input. Here we calculate our highest high and lowest low condition. It's basically it's looking for a 21 bar high or low with a 3 bar pivot to the other side of it. In other words, I want to make sure that we've had a pivot. Once we've had that pivot, after a 21 bar high or a 21 bar low, that's our condition. When that condition occurs, I want to capture that high or I want to capture that low. So here is that calculation. I'm going to just show it here. You can see I've broken the code down to, this is the code for doing the highest high, and this is the code for doing the lowest low. So both pieces of code are here. We're just going to walk through the highest high code, which is this code here. So basically, if we have a highest high, and that highest high has occurred 1 bar ago, I'm offsetting it 1 bar just to make sure that we have the pivot has actually occurred. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture that highest high. Now, I want you to think about our array here for a moment, and think about how TradeStation calculates. On every bar, we're going to move from the oldest bar to the newest bar within the chart. So we got to make that calculation once we insert the indicator. It's got to cycle through all the bars in the chart one time and make these calculations. So as this indicator moves through the chart, I want to always store the last 5 highest highs and lowest lows. So what that means is that every time there is a new highest high, I need to cycle all the highest highs within my chart through the array. I need to get rid of the one that drops off, and I need to insert the new one. This is a very typical little snippet of code that will allow you to always keep the last n number of values within an array. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying I want x to equal 5, which is the HLs is my input for the number of highest highs and lowest lows that I'm collecting. So it's going to go 5 down to 2. And basically what it does here is it puts 5 into 4, it puts 4 into 3, it puts 3 into 2, it puts 2 into 1, which leaves 1 open, and here I put in the highest high of that pivot, which is the high of 4 bars ago. And so I drop in the new high into that element number 1. Every time that occurs, every time there's a new highest high pivot, then it's going to cycle those values through the array and put in the new high into that array. Once I have all 5 elements filled, I average the array using the average array function. The average array function operates on a function. You plug in the array name and how big the array is. It averages it, outputs it to a variable, and then I'm able to plot that value. Now here I want to show you what I've done with this. Whenever we have a condition, I'm kind of combining show me's and indicators in one indicator here. I want you to notice that I have plot 2, which actually just puts a dot on that conditional bar, the bar that I'm storing the high of 4 bars ago. This just allows me a way of checking to make sure that the indicator is working the way I expect it to work. It's putting the dot on that highest high or that lowest low. So a lot of times when I'm writing complex indicators like this, I always build in some plots that prove that the indicator is working correctly. In this case, I'm adding a show me that actually puts a show me dot where the condition is met. And then plot 1, of course, is my average highest high, which is my support or resistance level. And so as long as highest high is greater than 0, I plot that value. Now I'm going to go to the dictionary here. This is the EasyLanguage dictionary icon here in the upper right hand corner. It's the last icon in the toolbar when you have an EasyLanguage study open. I'm going to click on that and bring up the EasyLanguage dictionary. If you want to find all of the functions that operate on arrays, I'm going to go to the Find tab here and simply type in array. And here you can see all of the different arrays, functions that operate on arrays. And I mean, it's not just highest and lowest and average, but there are standard deviations of arrays, there's kurtosis of an array, linear regression of an array, just a lot of different functions here that you can use to calculate and operate on arrays. And if something is not here that you need, like maybe you want to calculate stochastic of an array, that would be very easy to write. And you can use the sample array functions here to kind of see how we wrote the standard deviation or how we wrote the average array, and then just change the calculation so that it does the calculation that you need for that array. A question here about EasyLanguage. Does EasyLanguage run on your computer locally? It absolutely does. Everything in TradeStation is local to your computer. Nothing is uploaded to us. You basically open up a chart. The only thing that we look at is how much data are you requesting for that chart, what symbol it is. We send you the data, and all calculations, everything is done locally on your computer. So lots of different functions here that you can use to operate on an array. So this same code here that calculates that highest high and then cycles it through, averages it, and then plots it, that same code is here for the lower low. It's the exact same code, does the exact same thing, but it calculates that lower low support level. And so that's what you see here. So here's my show me. Every time there's a condition, it shows me where that highest high pivot was, and I'm taking the last 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you were to average those 5 points, that's the line there. And if you take a look here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It averages those 5, and there's our line. That shows our new support or resistance line. So that's the idea behind arrays. And again, they're used to store some kind of nonlinear value that you couldn't reference easily by just looking back in the chart. And again, loops and arrays, as I said at the outset, are powerful EasyLanguage tools that are part of the language. EasyLanguage is truly a programming language. It has all the elements of any programming language. And you can write very simple or very complex indicators and strategies within EasyLanguage. And as part of this online seminar series, we want to provide more of these EasyLanguage constructs and these concepts in EasyLanguage so that you can start building more and more of your own indicators and strategies utilizing the power of EasyLanguage. For those of you who are new to our online seminar series, make sure that you visit www.tradestation.com, go to the Support Center, and in the left navigation under our educational offerings, you'll notice that there are online seminars, and there's an archive there of all of the online seminars that we have done before. They cover things like basic TradeStation platform educational resources. It's also more advanced analysis using TradeStation, what's possible with TradeStation, strategy trading concepts, and of course EasyLanguage concepts. So take advantage of those online seminars. There's a lot of great information there, and it really shows you what's possible with TradeStation. A couple of questions here. Let me get to these questions before we finish here. First of all, someone's asking about what is the lowest index in an array. It is in fact 0. Like in any programming language, when you create an array, it starts at 0 and it goes to whatever the declaration max index number is. So if you put in a 10 in brackets, it's actually an 11 element array, 0 through 10. But there's one caveat that I want you all to be aware of with arrays, and that is that the functions that I showed you in the dictionary, they do not operate on the 0 element. They do not operate on the 0 element. So as a typical kind of rule of thumb using arrays, I never use that 0 element in an array if I know that that array is going to be used by one of the other functions. So that is something to keep in mind. If you are going to use that 0 element and you're not going to call a function, that's fine. But if you're going to use any of those array functions, just keep in mind that those array functions are not going to reference that 0 element. Let's see if we have another question here. If you sort an array, do the elements lose their original reference? They certainly do. They simply are placed in their new location, and you don't know what their original location was. Now, if you want to know what their original location was, that's a two-dimensional array. So basically, you can keep track of, say, what its original. You could create a two-dimensional array where one column is the original sort, and then column 2 is the new sort. So that's a very common way of looking at that. All right. Someone is asking just to take a look at the code for a second, maybe for a screenshot. If you want to do that, that's fine. There's that code for the first hop, so I'll give you a second to do that if you'd like. I'm getting a question from Lee. Please remind me how you added your 15-minute bar chart. Lee, I need you to be a little more specific. What do you mean by that? Do you mean how do I change the interval, or how did I create the chart initially? Give me a little more to go on with that question. No, you won't get a floating point error if you use the zero element. The zero element is perfectly fine to use. The only time you get a floating point error is if one of the array elements is 0 and you're trying to divide by that array element. That would be an example of that. A lot of times what you end up with, I'm getting some good questions here. Sometimes you'll get an error when you're using an array that says data out of range or array element out of range. And what that error means is that an array element out of range means that you tried to reference a element within a array that doesn't exist. In other words, let's say that you have a loop counter that goes from 0 to 5, but it's only an array that only has 4 elements in it. Well, when that loop gets to 5, there's no array there. That creates a memory error, and it creates a runtime error that stops your calculations. And so data out of range means that you're trying to reference a element within your array that doesn't exist, one that's too high. So you overran the array size with a loop or with some other reference. So whenever you see that, that's what it is. You got to go back and figure out, why am I going over the number of elements within that array? Very common error with arrays. All right, Lee, the way that you change the interval, there's a couple of ways. One is that in a chart, when you're in a chart, there's an icon here that says interval, and it's a clock with some bars. And you can also click on a chart and go to Format Symbol, and on the Settings tab you can change the interval there as well. So there's several different ways of changing that interval. Let me suggest that you watch the Charting Online Seminar archive. I think that'll be very useful to show you all the different things that you can do with charting, Lee. Well, there's a good question. How do I make a trade based on this? Well, I don't have a specific recommendation on how you would want to trade this, but what I would suggest is you put it into the chart and see what you see. Where do you see where you should make that trade? Should you make it when the bars cross it? Should you, do you go, is it more powerful when it's crossing above or below the upper or the lower one? Those are the kinds of things that really TradeStation allows you to look at and test. That's where strategy testing comes in. You can put this idea into a strategy and backtest and see where the best place might be to make that trade. So Lee, you want to add a 4-hour bar chart. So we don't do hours, we do minutes. So that would be a 240-minute chart, Lee. So here, in my 15-minute chart, I can go to Format. Well, actually, I can go to. Let me back up here. In this chart here, I can go to Format Symbol. I can make it intraday, and I can make it 240 minutes. And that would be your 4-hour bar chart, Lee. Rob, your question is about rolling commodity contracts. We do that with what's called a continuous contract. Actually, if you look at this chart here, Rob, this is a continuous contract of gold, and each of the contracts historically are just put together. And all you have to do is put an @ sign in front of the symbol, and that gives you the continuous contract, an unbroken data stream historically for whatever future that you're looking at. A couple more questions here, and I will let everyone go. Good question about learning more about EasyLanguage here. For those of you who are just getting started with EasyLanguage, a couple of things that I would recommend. First of all, if you cannot attend, or if you can attend, I highly recommend our 2-day live training boot camp. We offer them all over the country. It's 2 days hands-on in front of a computer, and we're going to write about 40 exercises over 2 days. This is a crash course in EasyLanguage, and after those 2 days, I have you writing indicators and strategies. Beyond that course, if you can't attend the 2-day course, we offer that course as a home study guide, which you can purchase from our support site on the tradestation.com site. So take advantage of that if you can't attend the 2 days. That home study guide is an excellent way of learning EasyLanguage at your own pace. Beyond that, we offer a new course, which is a live 2 days hands-on course, which is the Mastering EasyLanguage for Strategies. That course is the next step after the boot camp. It's 2 days of doing nothing but writing strategies. All the concepts in EasyLanguage that are related to writing more and more complex entries and exits and concepts related to strategy trading. We're going to be offering that course as a home study guide a little bit later this year. So if you can't attend that class, you can look forward to that home study guide. I would take a look at the live training calendar when you get a chance. We just added a new Mastering EasyLanguage class here in South Florida in December, so you may be interested in attending that class. Also, right around that same time, we are offering our ETF and stock symposium here in South Florida in that first week in December. So you should also take a look and see if that is something that you would be interested in attending at that time. So just a couple final questions here, and then again, I will let you go. We're getting a lot of questions, and that's good. I never mind questions. One of the questions is about the way that variables hold their value. You don't have to refill the array each time. The array holds its value bar by bar until you replace a value within an element, so they are always pushed forward to the next bar. All right. Well, I want to thank you for spending this time with me today. EasyLanguage, I was very happy we had quite a few people turn out for this seminar. I think that's great. I think it's a testament to the fact that TradeStation really gives you the ability to create whatever trading analysis and trading systems that you need to be able to create, and of course EasyLanguage is what makes all of that possible. So the more that you learn about EasyLanguage, the more you're going to get out of TradeStation, and I think the more you're going to get out of your trading. So again, I appreciate everyone's attendance today. Please look forward to the archive of this seminar within 2 weeks. I will also be posting on my workspaces and my code, so that you will have these indicators that you can download and play with them yourself. And again, this is just one of many topics that hopefully we'll be covering in the next year or so on the power of EasyLanguage. So again, thank you very much, and good luck in your trading. Good afternoon.